Hello. It doesn't matter what you call it. Creative writing, imaginative writing, descriptive writing. Any self-respecting exam board will have you doing it as part of your English GCSE. Now this video will take you from that initial question that pops out on the exam booklet all the way through to the end product, where I'll show you examples of the sort of descriptive paragraphs of the quality that would have Jacqueline Wilson herself weeping with envy. Now, irrespective of which exam board your school is with, you will find this video useful. However, this question here is pulled from the Edexcel exam board. Write about an irritating or annoying experience. Your response could be real or imagined. Your response will be marked for the accurate and appropriate use of vocabulary, spelling, punctuation and grammar. So that's the question that rears it up at us from the exam script. Our next step is going to be to identify the key words this question, because that's going to give us a clearer idea of exactly what it is the examiner wants us to do. And here we are with those key words highlighted in bold. The focal point of our task. We're being asked to write about an irritating or an annoying experience. It's also reassuring to know that this can be an imagined experience. You know, the examiner's not going to rig you up to a lie detector test to see if this actually happened to you. He doesn't care. It can be real, it can be made up, as long as it's good. And increasingly, a large chunk of your marks are determined by the accuracy of your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar. You know, your sentences should make sense, and also the range of vocabulary that you're using. So I've highlighted bits and bobs there just to reinforce the importance of accurate writing. Now, it's unlikely that you're cracking ribs, honking your heart out laughing at this cartoon, but I've put it in here because it does throw out a key message that you'd want to absorb. If you don't plan your work, it's going to be awful, or at the very least not half as good as it would be if you had planned. And it doesn't matter if you're a genius or a doofus, you know, Mensa or Densa, A star or G. Your writing is going to be faster, it's going to be more fluent, it's going to be better if you've thought a little about what you're going to say. The other reason that plan is psychological. If an examiner sees a little scruffy plan in the corner of the page, it reassures him. He thinks to himself, I'm not dealing with some noddy that's engaging their pen without their brain. So plan, because it'll enable you to order and organise and come up with ideas and phrases for your finished product. Just to recap then, planning, a key step in completing this task. Now, if the exam board is giving me 45 minutes to complete this task, this is how I would break down my time. I would spend 15 minutes, 15 minutes planning, because it's that important. I might have mentioned that. After that, I would chuck 25 minutes at writing the thing, making sure I was paragraphing clearly. And finally at the end, I would leave 5 minutes. Because SPAG is so important, spelling, punctuation and grammar, I spend 5 minutes just tooth combing through my work, checking that full stops and commas are in the right place, that my high-level vocabulary is spelt correctly, and that it all makes sense. And I advocate a two-step process to planning. I think about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. What I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. So let's apply this planning process to the task. Our task was write about an annoying or an irritating experience. I've opted for a train journey. I'm thinking, what could be annoying or irritating on a train? And I've come up with a few ideas here, haven't I? Annoying kids, you know, that little brat going nuclear, squawking the walls down with his crying because he isn't getting his own way. The food is rarely first class on a train. I've never had a half decent sandwich. It's always stringy bacon and those bits of bread that are kind of like the thickness and taste of cheap envelopes. And if the air conditioning jams, you know about it, because of course it gets really hot and the stench of people's body odour can be crippling. So these are some of the things, what I'm going to talk about. And still thinking about what am I going to talk about, I've developed one of those points, the unpleasant food. I've said the coffee and the sandwich from the catering car aren't going to be very nice, and I'm going to have to express my disgust and annoyance about this state of affairs in my writing. So I've got a clear idea now of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the coffee and the sandwich being vile.
You'll notice at this stage, I'm not throwing out any fancy language techniques, there's no metaphors or powerful words, I'm just worrying about the ideas. Now, I'm not going to bore you with my life story, but I used to be a decorator, and it's the same principle when you're painting wood, because the first thing you have to do is you have to prime and undercoat the wood, and it's not a very attractive looking layer, but it has to be done so that kind of sparkly, glossy finish can be applied to it. Same principle here. Think about what before you start chucking similes, metaphors and all that jazz about. We thought about what we're going to say, now we're thinking about how we're going to say it. It's at this point we can start chucking similes and metaphors about. How, as in, how can I make my ideas as engaging as possible when I'm presenting them on the page? And I've thought of some nice verbs and adjectives here and a little bit of metaphorical imagery that I can use to present my ideas about the food and drink. The sandwich, I can say it's slop. I can use the verb plopped, kind of it's splattered on the plate, and grease is a nice adjective to present it in a very unedifying light. As for the coffee, I can talk about it being like cement, maybe the colour of mud, and there's a lovely verb there, to wince, when you taste that disgusting drink. Obviously, the question asked about us being annoyed or irritated, so I'm going to come up with some imagery to telegraph that as well. I'm going to talk about my knuckles popping white, that show kind of anger and annoyance, and clenched fists to reinforce that idea. So I've thought here about how to dress up, how to apply a layer of gloss, as it were, to the ideas that I introduced in previous slides. And in a few moments' time, you're going to have a look at my polished paragraphs, the end product after I've turned my plan into sentences. And after we've read the paragraph, I'll explain why it is so good. Because, be under no illusions, the next paragraph you're going to see is very good. It shouldn't just get me a GCSE, probably should get me a knighthood as well.
Arise, Sir John.
And here we are then. Heading to the catering wagon, I ordered a sandwich and coffee to assuage my frustration. Unfortunately, what got plopped on the plate was a greasy looking bun with grey slop oozing out the sides. Horrified, I turned to the coffee. Ugh. The colour of mud and the consistency of cement, the coffee made me wince as I swallowed the lukewarm liquid. Clenching my fist to contain my irritation, I saw my knuckles pop white. And then there was the price. £6 for this poison? This wasn't off-peak travel. This was daylight robbery. You'll notice there's a couple of words in bold there. That's just to marshal our attention and see what tricks I'm using to secure those high grades. Assuage means like relieve, it's a high level verb. Plopped, as promise, is on there as well. Plopped is kind of onomatopoeic, you can almost hear it being splattered on the plate, can't you? We talked before about greasy being a fantastic adjective. Grey as well, you've got the alliteration of greasy and grey. And oozing is a good verb too. I guess a measure of whether a verb is effective or an adjective is effective is to think what a weaker student would put. Look at plopped, a weaker student might put on the plate. Look at oozed, a weaker student might have put coming out the sides. So that's a nice trick to work out if your language is effective. Kind of work backwards. What would the weaker student do? How can I gazump them? How can I improve on that weak adjectival verb? In bold this time, I've got some of the more advanced skills. You notice that one word sentence. In fact, it's a one word paragraph, isn't it? Ugh. Very dramatic, that. I wouldn't use too many of them, but a bit like seasoning in your food, salt and pepper. A couple used judiciously really improve the quality of what's being offered here. So 1 or 2 word sentences, very powerful tool, that, particularly if it's a 1 word paragraph. The consistency of cement, I'm engaging senses there. I guess I'm referring to texture, aren't I? And wince as I swallow the lukewarm liquid. There's another sensory description, and I'm quite fond of the alliteration of the L as well. Finally, I've varied my punctuation. I think we've got a question mark in there, an exclamation mark in there. My only regret is that I didn't use a colon. Well, there's a semicolon hiding away there. So you can see I've used a range of punctuation there as another subtle way of telling the examiner he's dealing with a top grade candidate. The final thing to notice here is that I'm at great pains to vary my sentences. They don't all start with I or then or the, do they? I've used heading to the catering wagon, unfortunately, which is of course an adverb, horrified, which is an adjective, and of course got the 1 word sentence ugh. I've even started one sentence with and. I wouldn't do that too often, but once or twice it can be quite a clever way of creating a sense of fluency in your work. Top tip, if your sentence starts with what they call the subordinate clause, the part of the sentence that doesn't make sense on its own, like unfortunately, that's not a sentence on its own, is it? Or heading to the catering wagon, that doesn't make sense as a sentence on its own either. If it starts with one of those subordinate clauses, the bit of the sentence that doesn't make sense on its own, whack in a comma before you put in the main bit of the sentence. So, horrified, comma, I turned to the coffee. I turned to the coffee, that can make sense as a sentence on its own. So, comma before that main bit of the sentence that makes sense on its own. Now, on the next paragraph you see, I'm not going to explain what I've done and the effects that I'm after, but feel free to think about some of the powerful verbs and adjectives that I've used and what effect you think I might have been aiming for there. This one's going to be on the idea that there's no air conditioning, and that's affecting the heat and the smell of the carriage. Gradually, the temperature in the carriage crept up. Beads of sweat broke on my forehead, running down to sting my eyes and dampen my collar. The heat seemed to boil my eyeballs. After half an hour in this sauna, an apology dribbled over the tannoy. Malfunctioning air conditioning. Grey. Owing to the crippling heat, many passengers began to shed coats and jumpers. All of a sudden, ... So have a good goggle at this mini masterpiece and be thinking, what have I done in terms of language techniques and structure techniques to make it so engaging? We're close to the finish line now, folks. It's time to sum up and bog off. So, conclusions. Identify the keywords in the question. That will clarify what's expected of you by the task. Then plan your response. So important. Think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. What you're going to say, how you're going to say it. And at the how stage, that's when you're thinking of the nice language and structural techniques to jazz up your writing. When you're writing your response, make sure you're varying your sentences so it doesn't sound too robotic and repetitive. And of course, add in more descriptive techniques. Clear paragraphing, also important to achieve those highest grades. And finally, at the end, get out the old tooth comb, just check through your work, make sure everything's kosher, spelling, punctuation, and the sentence is making sense. And that's that, folks. From question through a plan, all the way through to shiny, spiffy paragraphs. Practice this, and I guarantee you're going to be bulletproof in the exam hall. Best of luck.